Let's learn how to make this retro Pong game animation using friction. Now, a quick disclaimer. As of this recording, I haven't yet made a dedicated friction video, so nothing that really dives into the UI and all of the different features. So for this one, I'll briefly touch on the UI and some of the parameters and tools, etc., just so we can accomplish this animation. So later on, at a future time, I will make a dedicated friction video. So with that out of the way, let's jump right into it. So here we are inside of friction. I am using version 1.0.0 RC2, so the release candidate number 2. The official or stable release is 0.9 at the moment. Regardless of the version that you're using, whether it's the 0.9 or the RC2, you should be able to follow along and create this animation. So anything you might see on the UI that you don't have using the 0.9, don't worry, it shouldn't get in the way. So let's get started with creating our first project. So I'll hit New, and we should get a pop-up window over here. You can name your scene however you want. Friction allows for multiple scenes. So let's just call this Pong, for example. And for the dimensions, I'll go for 1920 by 1080. You can also click on these three dots over here, which gives you access to a couple presets for the dimensions. Next, we have the duration. You can set this either in frames or in seconds. I'm going to go for 120 frames, which should be 5 seconds since I'm working in 24 frames per second. Next, you can also choose your frame rate, and you have these three dots again, so you can choose a preset for the frame rate. Finally, we have the background. I want to note that the background is a placeholder. This background over here will not render when you export your animation. This is simply a placeholder, so something visual for you as you work. So you can choose whichever color you want, whichever helps you with your process. Now, for those of you using the RC2, you should see the option to set default, and this will set the parameters that you've selected here as the default for your next project. If you do go for the set as default, maybe reconsider what you call your scene. Finally, let's press OK. We now have our new project created. I'll expand the timeline down here, and up in the left corner of the canvas area, we have Pong, which signifies the scene that we're working with. If you left click on it, if you had more scenes, you'd see a drop down with the rest of the scenes, but over here you can see that we have Pong active. When it comes to the settings of your scene, you can go to the menu bar inside of scene and you can create new scenes, delete existing one, and you can also modify the scene properties. So if you wanted to change the name, the dimensions, frame rate, etc. Now personally, I like to customize the workspace, and to do so, you can use the little arrows here at the top of the panels. So you have up, down, left, right. So we have two panels here. This first one is the fill and stroke. And then at the bottom here, we have properties, assets, and queue. Queue is for rendering. Over the timeline in the canvas, we have these buttons here, which allows us to separate. So you can have multiple canvas areas and each one assigned to a scene if you'd like. I'll press the X to close out of it. So I'll start by modifying my workspace. So I'll push the fill and stroke over to the left. I'll do the same thing with the properties. Push it to the left, and I'll push it down, and then to the left again. Let me make sure everything is in order. There we go. Now, a few quick things about the UI. You can go inside of View, and in here you'll see a couple keyboard shortcuts as well as the ability to hide the timeline or hide the fill and stroke. I will be using the hide fill and stroke every now and then. So it's F on the keyboard. You can also detach the timeline and the queue window. Now down here we have property filter, and by default it might be set to selected. We'll see what it is later in the video, so I'll leave it to selected for now. And of course, inside of View, if you go up to zoom, you have the option to zoom in, zoom out, and fit to canvas. This is one that I use often, so it's Control-0. Finally, if you want to learn more about friction, you can go inside of help and go down to website, or even go in the upper right corner here where you should see a little friction icon. Left click on it, you'll get this window here. And from here, you should be able to see the shortcuts. All right. I always recommend to go inside of the menu bar, check for preferences, and just have a look around. Look at all the different options that you have. All right, so let's get started. Before we create the playing field for our Pong match, even on the Friction website, they'll tell you that they recommend that you create your assets, so your graphic assets and all, in an external software, so something like Inkscape. The reason for this, Friction is not built for design. There are a few features that are currently missing that are on the roadmap, so they're coming with later versions, but at the moment they're not there. This includes grids and snapping, amongst other features. So they do recommend that you use something external. So just for this example, I'm going to use Inkscape. Inkscape is great because it saves the projects as SVGs, and Friction is able to import the SVGs. What it cannot import from the SVGs are clipping mask, filters, and a couple other things that we'll see, such as doing dash strokes. Let's jump into Inkscape in Design or Playing Field. I can also show you how to create the playing field directly inside of Friction. It's just a few extra steps, and it might be worth knowing a bit on how you can approach this if you wanted to do everything inside of Friction. So I'm opening Inkscape here. I'll go inside of Video and I'll look for Video 1080p. If you're interested in learning more about Inkscape, there's a great YouTube channel, Logos by Nick, which can teach you everything there is to know about Inkscape. I'll close these side panels for now. We have the same composition as what we have inside of Friction. I'll hold down Ctrl plus Shift and D so you can see the settings here. So it's 1920 by 1080 with a scale of 1 and we're working in pixels. All right, for the Pong field, it's actually very straightforward. For this, I'm simply going to use the pen tool. So I'll left click here, I'll hold down Ctrl so I can draw a straight line. This is one feature that Friction does not yet have. I'll go to the other end and I'll left click. I'll press Enter to confirm. And with it still selected, I'm going to press Shift, Ctrl, and then F on the keyboard to open the fill and stroke. I'll go inside of stroke, I'll give it a solid color. Then I'll change the color to white. And then inside of stroke style, I'm going to increase the size a bit. Now right now, because we're working with the color white and the background is white, this is just a preview, just like in Friction, I can grab the rectangle tool and simply draw a shape over the entire canvas. I'll switch this to a gray color. I'll delete the stroke. Holding down Shift, I'll click on this X button down here. And now, with the selection tool active, you can simply click on this button here to lower selection to the bottom. So I'll left click on the stroke that I created up here. I'll press Shift Ctrl A on the keyboard to open the Align and Distribute. And with it set to page, I'm going to align it on the vertical axis as such, so it's in the middle. I'm going to do the same thing with the background, so horizontal and vertical. Now I'll grab the stroke, I'll press Ctrl D to duplicate, then I'll left click on it, start dragging it down and then hold Ctrl. This will lock it on the Y axis. I'll move it near the bottom. I might actually make both of them a little wider. So I'll press N on the keyboard to grab the, the nodes tool. I'll left click on the first one, left click on the second one. I'll left click, hold and drag to make a selection, and then I'll use the arrow key to drag it further out, about here, let's say. Okay, I'll press S to grab the selection tool, and then I'll align it again, as such. Now, with the Move Align Selection as group, I'm going to align both of these horizontally and vertically on the canvas. Right, what's missing now is to make the separator in the middle. So I'll grab the pen tool again. You can press B on the keyboard or simply left click on it. I'll left click here, hold down Control so I can draw a straight line. I'll drag it down, left click, and then press Enter. I'll go back to the fill and stroke over here, go to stroke, add a color. I'll go to stroke style. I'm going to reduce this, let's say to 25. And for the dashes down here, I'll choose a set of dash that might just work for us. Something like this should do. We can adjust the offset so that it's a bit more symmetrical. All right, I'll grab the selection tool. I'll go back to the alignment and I'll align it to the center. Okay, we're almost done. Finally, let's create our players. So I'll grab the pen tool again with B on the keyboard. I'll left click, hold down Control, drag it down. Say about this length should do. Left click, press Enter, and I'll change the stroke back to a solid line, and I want it to be a lot thicker. So let's go for 40, even 50 should do. Kind of the same thickness as above, so I'll go with 40 for this one. All right, now with this over here, I'll press Ctrl D to duplicate, I'll left click, then start dragging, and then I'll hold down Ctrl to lock it on the X axis. Move it to the other end of the field, hold down Shift, click on this one, and then I'll go back to the alignment and I'll align these on the canvas. All right, all that's left to do is our ball. We can either do it with a rectangle and give it rounded corners or simply use an ellipse. So now I can simply left click, hold, and as I'm dragging, I'll press Shift and Control to get it to be proportional and expand from the center. I'm going to change the fill to white and I'll eliminate the border. So I'll hold down Shift, click on the X, and we have our ball. Might be a little too big. Doesn't have to be too small either. So I guess this should be just fine, like this. All right. So we're basically done. Now we can save this, Control S, navigate to your project folder, and to save this, I'll call this Pong Match Field. Save. Now something else that will translate inside of Friction is if you group your elements. So if I were to grab this top edge and the bottom one, and let's say even the separator here, so holding down Shift and clicking on each one of them, then I press Ctrl G on the keyboard, and they're grouped, this group will stay grouped inside of Friction. The other thing we can do is if I press Ctrl Shift L for layers, we can rename our assets and they will keep their name inside of Friction. So for example, this right paddle over here, I can rename it to Player 1 or Player 2. This one on the left, I'll call it Player 1. This over here, I'll call it Ball. The background, I guess I'll call it Solid Color. And for the field, I'll call this Field. And inside of it, I'll rename this to Separator. And for these two, I'm actually going to make them one object. So I'll grab the first one, then hold Shift, grab the second one. I'll go up to the menu bar inside of Path, and I'll click on Union. So now, these two are one object. With that done, we can save our project again and switch over to Friction. You can import the SVG or you can link it. The difference between linking and importing SVGs inside of Friction is quite simple. When you import an SVG, it's editable. All of the assets remain as vectors and you can edit them inside of Friction independently. But if you link the SVG, it's going to be like a flattened image, so you won't have access to the individual vectors inside of it. However, you can modify the SVG file inside of Inkscape, for example, and upon saving it, it's going to update inside of Friction. So for this one, we're going to import it because we want to have control over the two players in the ball. You can import the SVG either by clicking on Import, or you can simply drag and drop it inside of Friction. I'll go for Import, I'll grab the SVG over here and press Open, and there we have it. I'll press Ctrl 0 so we can see everything. And you'll notice that the separator here in the middle is not separated. It doesn't have the dashes. And this is one of the things that I mentioned that would not translate inside of Friction. So something like the stroke style. But not to worry, we can fix that inside of Friction. But first, let me expand this here. And you see we have layer 1. Inside of it, if you click on the little arrows for the drop down, you'll see we have all of the different assets. So with layer 1 selected, you can either hold down Shift Control and press G to ungroup, or simply right click, go down to Action, and then select Ungroup. This is going to free all of our assets. We have our separator and we also have the edges. To rename the edges, I'll right click and then go to Rename, and I'll call this Edges. All right, now let's go ahead and work on the separator. The first thing I'll do is hide the fill and stroke. So I'll press F on the keyboard, and now if you notice, we only have edges here inside of Properties. If we go back to the menu bar inside of View, down to Properties Filter, this is what the selected means. So only what is selected will appear inside of Properties. To change this, I'll go to View, Properties Filter, and switch to All. Now I'll go to Field, and separator. With the separator selected, I'll expand it, then I'll right click on it, go down to action, and I'll look for outline base effect, and then I'll choose dash. Now we can go down to outline base effects inside of the field, expand the dash effect, and we can change the distance between the dashes. I'll look for something that's a bit symmetrical. Let's say like this. I'll click somewhere else to deselect it and modify the dash a little bit, like this. Perfect. I can now collapse this again. Now currently Friction does not offer guides, so there's no way to really have anything to guide the position and the distance of the ball and the players. One thing that I do for myself is I use a shader that is a 2D grid. Now I'll leave a link down in the description for where you can download the shaders. The older shaders are compatible with Friction 0.9, and the newer shaders are compatible with Friction RC2. But to keep it simple, we're just going to eyeball it for now. So let's start animating the ball. But before we do so, I don't want to be able to select the background, so I'm going to lock it with the little lock over here, and I'll do the same with the field. Now I'll left click on the ball, I'll press G to grab. This will allow us to move the ball around, and I can left click to drop the ball. You can hold down Alt, left click to pan around, but this also moves the object that you have selected, as you can see. Alternatively, you can simply use the middle click and pan around without risking moving your object. If you scroll up or down, it's going to zoom in and out to the position of the cursor, and Ctrl 0 to reset everything. All right. The other keyboard shortcuts are S for scale and R for rotate, but can't really see the rotation right now. Now, if you're wondering why the bounding box is so far away, this is because of the stroke. So if I press F to bring back the fill and stroke, I go to stroke over here. The width of the stroke is set to 40. As I change this value, the bounding box moves. All right, I'll hide the fill and stroke again, press Ctrl 0, and now let's start animating the ball. You can either expand it over here on the timeline or inside of properties to access the properties that you want to animate. I myself prefer to use the properties. So inside of properties, I'll expand ball, inside of transform, and then translation. Now, keyframes inside of frictions are pretty straightforward. If you left click on a white dot next to a property, it's going to create a keyframe for it. Now, if I right click on the value, you'll see that we have recording and it's checked on, which means whenever you modify this property somewhere else, so I move forward a few frames, press G, I move it, it automatically creates another keyframe. If you were to uncheck recording or even click on the red dot, it's going to delete all the keyframes associated with this value. So for example, if I click on translation, the fact that I clicked on the X, it's going to create a keyframe for both. And if I click again, it's going to delete all the keyframes. So keep that in mind. Once you've started recording keyframes for a value, it is on forever, so to speak. All right, so for the ball, I'm going to add a keyframe for translation. I'm going to left click here and drag it to frame 0. Then I'll move the playhead over to frame 0. And now I want you to notice that we have this blue highlight over the timeline. If I press tab, it's going to go over the canvas area. This lets you know which one of the two is currently active. So if the timeline is active, even though I have the ball selected, if I press G, it's going to move the keyframe on the timeline. So you have to make sure that where you want to control the object, if it's the object or keyframe, that it is the active area. All right. So let's get started. So I'll grab the ball and I'll place it up here. Now when moving your objects, if I press G to grab, if you press X, you can lock it on the X axis. And if you press Y, you can lock it on the Y axis. So I'll grab the ball, I'll put it at the edge here of the panel, a little bit in. Then I'll press G, Y, and move it up. So this will be the first position. I'll move forward 10 frames. So over here, I'll press G to grab, I'll move it around here, then I'll left click to release, GY, and I'll move it down a bit. Let's say around here. left click to release. Now I don't remember if this is available in the version 0.9, but you have this magnifying glass here so you can fit horizontally, and it's going to fit the entire length of the timeline. You can also change the duration of your animation directly from above the timeline. So here you can see it's 120. This is the frame that we're on, so in the middle here. And then this is the starting frame over to the left. All right, next I'm going to move forward 5 frames. Press G to grab the ball. I'll make it hit the border here, say around here. Left click to release. I'll move forward 10 frames, so now we're going to frame 25. Press G to grab, I'll move it up. Let's say around here. Press GY to make sure. I'm gonna move it forward a little bit, such, then GY and move it back up around here. I'll move forward 10 frames again, so we're going to 35. Press G to grab, I'll move it around this spot. Left click to release. I'll move forward 10 frames, so we're going to 45. G to grab, I think I'll move it around down here. I'll make sure it is close enough to the player. Move it back down. Then I'll move forward 5 frames, so to frame 50, and I'll make it hit the border again. I'll move forward 10 frames, so now we're going to frame 60. Grab it, I'll move it all the way up here, move it up to this point. I'll move forward 10 frames again, G to grab, and I'll move it, let's say here, bring it down a little bit, maybe as such. And finally, I'll move 10 frames again, G to grab. I'll move it around the center here so it's actually hitting this part. And one last 10 frames to get the frame 90. And now I want to copy the first keyframe, so I'll left click on it, make sure it's selected, press Ctrl C to copy. And now with the playhead where I want to paste it, I'll press Ctrl V and paste the ball into the first position. Now we have essentially a loop. Friction also caches the animation. This is this little light blue bar at the top of the timeline. And another feature that you have, again, I don't remember if this is in version 0.9, is I'll place the playhead over frame 0, or press I on the keyboard, and then I'll click over the last frame, and I'll press O on the keyboard, and now we have an in and out zone. Now I'll press play, and we can preview the bouncing ball. You can also make it loop, and in the case where you make it loop, although you can press spacebar to pause it, it won't actually stop the playback. You have to either hit stop preview or press escape on the keyboard. All right, I'll turn off the loop. For the in and out points, you can also go to the menu bar and go inside of, I believe it's scene. You have set in, set out, in, clear, and out. You can also use markers. All right, so that's it for the ball. Now let's move on to player 1. And all we have to do is make sure that player 1 is in the right position when the ball comes to its side. So I'm going to collapse the ball. I'll go inside of player 1, expand, transform, translation. And now it's only really supposed to move up and down, which is the Y axis. So I'll only click the white dot next to Y. And let's make sure to move this to the very first frame, so frame 0. And I'll move the playhead there as well. Now, the timeline is the active area, so you can either click on the canvas or press tab to make it the active area. Now I'll press G and then Y, I'll move it up. And seeing that the ball is going to go downwards, let me see, it goes down. So I'm going to make it hit the edge a little bit around here. I'll move forward, the ball hits down here, bounces down. So around here, I'm going to press G and Y, and I'll make player 1 go down as if they're anticipating that the ball is going downwards. And then we move up here, GY, and move them up. Let's see, the ball is going to go down again, but not as low. So I'm going to make it a little higher, maybe around here. Also, just so you know, this middle point here is the pivot point. So this is where it would rotate from. I'll press escape to break out of this. If ever you move it and you want to place it back at the center, simply right click and go to center pivot. All right, let's move on. So it hits over here, goes down. Now this time it is gonna go down. So at this point, player one is here, but it goes down. So I'm gonna make it the very edge. So it hits, goes up, back down. So I'll make player one go up as if they're anticipating that the ball is going to bounce upwards, and they'll have to run back down again. So let's see, the ball goes up. So they're going to hit it a bit here, goes up. And I want it to finish at the start position so that we have a loop. So I'll left click on the first keyframe, Control C to copy. And then with the playhead where I want to paste it, Control V. So now if I play back, let's put the playhead to the very start. You can also press Shift Spacebar so that it starts playing from the very beginning. Now this might seem a bit robotic, but we can modify the animation using the graph editor later on. Let's move on to player 2. And for this one, I might just make it a time lapse because essentially I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to move player 2 in accordance to the position of the ball. So I'll jump back to the first frame. I'll expand transform, translation, add a keyframe on Y. And we can start with player 2 over here. So again, on the last frame, I want it to be at the initial position. So Control C with the playhead where I want to paste it, Control V, and we now have our perfect loop. Okay, now for the animation, it's a bit stiff, it's linear, so a bit mechanical, you could say. But before we continue, let's first save our project. Completely forgot about this. I'll put a reminder in the start of the video, honestly. So press save, and I'll call this Pong Match V1. Save. All right, so we have the baseline of our animation, and now we can jump into the graph editor. This is where things might get a little bit more advanced or complicated, but we're going to keep it very simple, and I'm going to show you some neat tricks that you won't find in the friction manual, at least not yet. So let's jump into it. Let's add some rhythm to the animation. So for this, we will be using the timeline. So I'm going to expand it up a little bit. And then I'll press Tab to activate the canvas, Control 0 to zoom out. Now let's start with player 1. So over here, I'm going to expand the transform, go inside of translation, and make sure to click on the Y. This is because, let's say I click on X over here and we jump inside of the graph. You'll see that we don't really have anything because X is not animated. But if I click on Y, we then get to see the animation of Y. So this is to say that you only see the curve of the animated property that is selected. Now again, I don't remember if this is in version 0.9, but this is the ability to fit vertical and fit horizontal. We can also drop the duration here to 90. That way it fits the entire animation. You can also use Control and the mouse wheel to zoom in or out. And I believe this is in RC1 or RC2 only, which is holding down Shift to be able to zoom vertically. So I'll use these to reset everything. And now let's add a bit more character to our animation. So in the very first frame, this first keyframe over here, I'll left click to select it. And then I'm going to make it a corner node. So we get this node hand over here. Now I'm going to left click on it and then I'll press X on the keyboard so I can lock it on the X axis. The same goes for Y. So I'll drag it in. So now it stays up a little longer and then jumps down. I'll do the same thing with this node above. I'll grab this keyframe. I'll make it a corner. And now if we play back, you can see how player 1 kind of slows down and then jumps back up. So I think this one works pretty well. Actually, I'm going to grab this node here, press X to lock it, and I'll drag it out a bit more. So that way player one lingers down a bit longer and then jumps up. And now I want them to stay up here longer, so I'll click on this node here, make it a corner node, but I'm going to left click on the handle on the left click hold, and then I'll press delete. This will simply delete the node that we had selected or the handle that we had selected. And now with this one, I'll left click, press X, and I'll drag it out. So now it stays up a little longer and then jumps down. Okay. I'll leave this one linear a bit, but I'm going to change this one so it stays up a little longer. So again, we'll make it a corner. I'll left click on this one, left click hold, and then press delete. Then I'll left click on this one, X, and drag it out. Let's see. Doesn't seem to stay up long enough, so I'll make this one a corner. I'll grab this one and I'll drag it down. So now it kind of stays up there and then snaps down. Might be a bit too snappy. Put it as such. I'm going to left click on this keyframe, press G on the keyboard, then Y. And now I can change the value. So I'll move it down. So it does have to be a little higher, as such, around here. Okay, and for this one, I'll left click, press X, and then I'll drag it down a bit. So stays down a bit longer and then snaps back up. You know what? I'll actually make this one a corner node, left click on this one, hold, press delete, select the keyframe again, click, hold, drag it out a bit. Matter of fact, I'll even curve it up slightly as such. There we go. You can also pan here by middle clicking. So I'll grab this last one and add a tiny bit of ease to it. And there we have it. This is for player one. I'll collapse all of this, then I'll switch to player two. I'll make sure to click on player two to make it active, to go inside of transform, translate, and then click on the Y. There we go. Just click on player two again. So I'm simply going to repeat these steps to give a bit more of a flow to player two. So I'll just speed through this. All right, so if I play back, there we go. We now have our loop. I'll click on the graph icon here to go back to the keyframes and give a bit more space to the canvas. Press tab, make it active, Control 0. All right, so now we have our base animation. The next thing I want to do is to change the colors and then add a bit of motion blur to the ball itself. So to change the colors, if I press F, we have the fill and stroke, and all we really have to do is select the elements that we want to change the colors of. So for the field, I had already locked it. So I'll go inside of the edges here and I'll change the color to yellow. My bad, this is the fill. I'll cancel this, I'll go to stroke, flat, and then I'll add the yellow fill to the strokes. All right. Now the separator is above the edges, so I can simply left click on it and drag it down, release. If you drag too far, you'll see that this white line becomes wider, and this means that we're going outside of the group. So just keep it right under, release. Friction also has the ability to align elements. It's right down here at the bottom of properties. You can align geometry to the scene, and you have a few more options. You can also align the pivot point from here. As for the background, this is solid color. I'm going to go to fill and let me unlock this. Make sure I grab it. And now we're going to give it a very dark navy blue color like this. I think this works just fine. Now, if you wanted to change the dimensions of the separator, you simply go to stroke and you have the width over here. You can also change the cap and the joints, just an FYI. You also have different color modes to pick the colors from down here. And in the latest version of Friction, so the RC2 so far, you can actually add colors to a bookmark. So you can bookmark the colors. All right, so this should do for now. I'll press F again. Now let's add some motion blur to the ball. So I'm going to lock the background again, grab the ball, I'll expand it, collapse the transform. And now for the motion blur, I'm going to right click on the ball, go down to Action, down to Raster Effect, and choose Motion Blur. Now all of these other effects that I have here, so if I go to the menu bar inside of Effects, Raster Effects, all of these are shaders, so the sort of plugins that I've mentioned before. And I'll leave a link down in the description for you to download them. And the older ones are compatible with Friction 0.9, and the newer ones are compatible with Friction RC2. All right, so back to the ball, right click, Action, Raster Effect, Motion Blur. So now we go inside of Raster Effects, Motion Blur, and you'll see it has this one ghost ball following it. We can change the frame step, so let's say 0.125, so it makes it a lot closer, or let's say 0.15, so 0.15. For the simple count, this is how many of them do you want. And then we have the opacity. So let's see how this looks. I could increase the amount and reduce the timing, but then I think it's always going to be there. All right, I'm going to settle on 3 and make it 0.15, sorry, 0.15. Just to give it a little bit of motion blur. Now, one last thing, at the bottom of the timeline, you have resolution. This is the preview resolution. And this comes into play when we're creating layers and such. So when we rasterize our assets. All right, we now have our animation with a little bit of motion blur added to the ball. Let's learn how to render out our animation. So to render this, we can go down to Q, go up to the plus button, press the plus. We're going to render out the Pong scene. We have the scene properties where you can change the properties here if you wish to. You can render the scene range, which means from 0 to 90, or you can render the in and out range, which is the in and out that we manually set. Now, I don't know if this is available in 0.9, but it's available here. Next, we're going to go to Profile, and you can choose out of these profiles here. You can also edit them, but I'm going to choose MP4 without audio because we don't have an audio here. And for the format, you can also tweak a few things in here. So if you're not satisfied with the default format, you can also increase the bit rate for higher quality, etc. So I'll leave it as it is for now. The last thing is to choose where you want to export it to. So I'll press the button here and change the name. I'll call this Pong Match Animation V1. Save. So this will be the name of our file. And finally, we can simply hit render. Next, we can click on this little play button to open up our animation in our default player. And here it is. And that's it. There's a Ko-fi link down in the description for those of you who like to support the channel. You can click on this playlist here to learn more about Kdenlive and possibly Friction as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.